to the children of Israel that they go forward, but lift up thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I, behold, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon all his host, and upon his chariots, upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. The angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of a cloud went before their face, and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was the cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all the night. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground. And the waters were a wall unto them on the right hand and on their left, and the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillars of the fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. And I'm going to have, since it is Mother's Day, have my wife, if she could, please bring the message.
Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for praying for us. Thank you for being with us this far in the service. Today that you will teach us how to remember what he's saying. Give him the words to say, and help us all to have it in our hearts, and we get something out of it through you and through your glory. In your name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated. Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 8 has a little theme to it. And you're going to notice this throughout the Bible. It says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Then God said, let the firmament be in the midst of the water, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters from which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so, and God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. You'll also know, if you read the story of Hezekiah and Isaiah, 2 Kings chapter 19:35, it talks about, as you'll remember, Hezekiah, he comes along and he says, I'm going to defy the kings of Sennacherib. And we even have the Sennacherib stele that references this in that old history of the Assyrian army. And they come up, and the massive host of Assyrians that were wiping out every nation had come up, and now they're somewhere near 135,000 men were standing there ready to siege Jerusalem and destroy Hezekiah. As you know, it was in the middle of the night. It came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote the camp of the Assyrians, 185,000. And when they rose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. Find it again with Jesus Christ, Mark 16, verse 2. And verily, early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came into the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. Now he rose before the morning. He rose in the night. So what is the point of this? Why does God always seem to start the day? Everything starts at night with God. Why does God start everything at night while the rest of us, we start our day off in the morning, but yet the Jewish calendar still to this day honors this? You'll find that it is in the middle of the night that God does His job. It is in the middle of the night that God is most likely to be performing something when we are unawares. It's not in the day. And many times you think of Satan being the one who rules the night, when in fact it's the opposite. And you'll find that every time in Scripture that God is moving and He's changing lives and changing hearts, He's moving in the night. When the Egyptian army was coming in to conquer Israel, and they fled into the water and God separated the sea, the miracle happened in the night. But as they came up on the other side in the morning, God ceased performing His work. And the Philistines were destroyed. God begins his days at night because darkness is what he started with. And he can see just as clearly in the dark as he can at night. If you'll remember, I don't know how many of you know the crossing of the Delaware by George Washington. There's no single date for us. The crossing of the Delaware doesn't have a single date. Matter of fact, it's December 25th through December 26th. And the reason why the crossing of the Delaware is known as those two dates, and they couldn't point to one, is because I think George Washington had a little bit of a clue as to how God worked. And if he didn't, there's a good clue that God was working on that night. Him and 2,400 men, in the middle of the night under severe darkness and cold, you would have thought that everything that was happening was his enemy. Him and 2,400 men decided they were going to get on the Delaware River and they were going to travel across the Delaware to Trenton to fight the British. And encampment there at the British. And as they started to do so, they all got in their ships and their boats, and as they were ferried across with all of their cannons and all of their ammunition, all of a sudden you would have thought the most horrible thing is as ice started freezing around the boats as they're plodding through this water, freezing every single one of them. You can see many images of George Washington standing above the fog. The fog is completely covering the land. They said, man, we can't see what we're doing. Well, neither could the people in Trenton. And as they got onto land, all of a sudden it started to pour snow in the middle of the night, around 4 a.m. Still dark. They said, now we're walking in all this deep snow. This is horrible. Look at our horrible, horrible circumstances. They said we were going to lose. They were so sure. There were men that were walking. There were letters written by the soldiers that were there that day that they said, as we were walking, I began to be so numb and tired that I began to fall asleep as I was walking, knowing I was freezing to death. Look at the plight that had come to us. Yet, unbeknownst to them, this caused those soldiers to all put away their guns at Trenton, be standing as close as they could to the fire, and be worried about keeping warm while the snow was billowing down. George Washington was coming through this terrible storm. He thought, with all this snow and all these horrible things happening at 8 a.m., we can't possibly get there before daybreak, and then they'll know we're coming. But God just happened to send some snow that day. At 8 a.m., he showed up to see a surprised army at Trenton. They ended up slaying 200 soldiers and took 900 captive with almost no losses. The greatest victory of the Revolutionary War was over the middle of the night. So let's look at Moses. How does God work? What is the character of God? First off, I want you to notice, it's just like many times we don't always understand what's happening, but God directed them, first off, into the valley, the darkness and despair. God guided them into the darkness. You say, he did? Exodus chapter 14, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Piharoth, between Migdol over the sea and over against Baal-Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. God told Moses, you're going to go get trapped. I want you to take them to a desperate situation. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon his hosts. And the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. We see the same thing in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. He was led into the darkness. God many times ends up directing us into the darkness, unbeknownst to us. And we have no idea exactly what's going on, and we're like, what are you thinking? I thought of this. Daniel Alexander was telling me they do military drills, and Daniel's a military man. And he's probably the best military man on the face of the earth. Forget Jacko Willing. He's over here somewhere, and Daniel's up here somewhere. So we're not sure exactly where he rates, but Navy SEALs don't have anything on him. But what he says is they used to do military games. And whenever they do military games, they all get around and they say, okay, what we're going to do is when we're having this military game, we have to do it in the day. We have to do all of our fighting in the day. And of course, at first you're like, well, why is that? Well, it's simple. Only one team in all the earth can see in the dark. And that's Team USA. We're the only ones who have night vision goggles that are standard issue for our men. So they say, we have to do all the war games in the day, and we gotta have this rule, and this rule, and this rule, and this rule, because it's not really fair. It's not fair if we do it at night. Did you know this is exactly why God leads us into the night? It's just because we can't see doesn't mean the God who's guiding us can't. And guess what? Satan can't see in the darkness of our life as well as God can. So whenever it's darkest for us and we are least aware, we have to understand Satan is not so smart that he's outsmarting God. He is not omnipresent. He is not omniscient. He is not all-powerful. This is not Satan. He is one individual that is a fraction of the power of God. He's deceptive, and that's his best quality. So whenever it comes to the darkness, there's only one. And it's not a fair match if you're on the Lord's side. He intentionally led them into a despairing situation because he said, I know the Egyptians don't know any better. He was smarter than them. The people, then you get to the people, which is exactly what we do. Exodus chapter 14, verse 9. But the Egyptians pursued after them. All the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army overtook them, encamping by the sea by Pi-hahiroth and before Baal-zephon. And Pharaoh drew nigh, and the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. Now here they are doing what we do. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. God, why? Why is the question. Elizabeth Elliot, she writes a book, and we've been speaking about this, and this is the reason I'm mentioning these two things. She wrote in her book, In the Gates of Splendor, she begins to describe there doesn't seem to be a cause of why. And she doesn't view the reason her husband was killed as, oh, this is just some normal thing that happened, and this is God's divine plan. And even now, it doesn't even seem like she says, you know what, I know why he did that. If you read it, it doesn't seem to sound like she knows. I don't know why he did it. But as I thought for a second, one of the most read books in Christendom, I know very few people have not read Through the Gates of Splendor if they're readers. Very few people. And she wrote a book about what happened to her husband and sent it off all throughout all of Christendom in the midst of her darkness. And she'll never know why, but there have been thousands of missionaries inspired by Elizabeth Elliot because of her darkness. Specifically because of her darkness. And it may have had nothing to do with her husband at all. But her darkness would inspire more missionaries. And whenever we get to this point in our lives, and we get to these dark points, we say, why are you doing this? This is what happens. This isn't new. And so sometimes mothers might feel that way. But God performed the miracle. The third point, God performed a miracle of separating the water at night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind. And all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Mothers, whenever you wake up in the middle of the night to get your children, which you probably do, especially Artie's wife, because I know I'm more helpful than Artie is. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I'm going to go with it. You know, many times whenever you're up in the middle of the night, you're with the kids, and you're all by yourself, it seems, and there's no one else around you, and then whenever you finally get to lay her down and head down at night, well, guess what? When you're up working, that's whenever God's working too. And you don't realize it, but those times that you're up in the middle of the night with your kids, those kids are more likely to remember those times than most of the day time. Because I can tell you right now, I can remember a whole lot of times I was sick. Whenever I was sick, Dad probably remembers this too. There's a lot of times when I was sick and I felt horrible that I went up to Mom and she was there. And those are the memories that have been stuck with me. While you're thinking you're doing nothing, you're making a permanent impact on your child that they know, if I go here, I have love. Just like when you're working at night, that is when God is working. And I wonder, why is it that at night, you know, Mandy and I, we'll be laying down, getting ready to go to sleep. For whatever reason, that's the time to start a theological discussion. Middle of the night, that's when we decide we're going to do it. And so all the kids are finally in bed, and we have like a reprieve for the rest of the day. And you'll find that that's the time when people are more likely to think about God than ever before. I can't tell you how many times it was in the middle of the night that I got to God in prayer because I felt Him tugging on my heart. I can't tell you how many times I've been woken up in the middle of the night to pray. I can't tell you how many times it's been in the middle of the night that I found most of my encouragement. It's because God tries your deepest thoughts at night. It's when He's working. And the fourth one, the Jews made the difficult journey of faith through the Red Sea. Children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them to the right hand and on their left. Now, if you can imagine that, a giant wall. Okay, God, you're moving it back. And, okay, God, I want you to do this for me. Okay, God, maybe God will say, you know what? I want you to go and do this exact thing. And He may give you a specific point in life, and let's say missionary. I know many people have been a missionary since that's the thing. And I know of one specific missionary, young lady, she felt like she was called to South America. And she decided she was going to go to South America, and she said, well, I don't really know how I'm going to do it. I remember talking to him at college, and her and my buddy Christian were standing there, and she said, I don't really know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to go to South America, and I'm going to be a missionary in South America. I feel like that's what God wants me to do. Sure enough, I remember when she moved to South America, she lived there for several years, and I can just imagine, because whenever she came back, as she was getting ready to leave, she said, I only need a little bit of money. I could just imagine, here it is God's put you in a place, and now on both sides, you are completely dependent on God in the middle of the night with nowhere else to turn to. And God said, I can be your provision and your security. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but this is exactly what the Israelites were facing. Can you imagine the fear that would tremble at your heart? Man, I hope I don't have the wrong thought. Man, I hope I have everything right in my mind as I'm walking right down the center of God's massive provision. Is that not exactly how you feel where God tells you to step out and do something different? The last point, in the morning, God stopped His work. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked into the host of Egyptians through the pillar of the fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels and drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel. The Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians." The Lord said unto Moses, "Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that thy waters may come again unto the Egyptians, upon the chariots, upon their horsemen." And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea. The sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked to the host of the Egyptians. In the morning watch. It's amazing, many people who come on the other side of trial, we see the other side of the trial. I was listening to John C. Maxwell. He was talking about leadership. Somebody said, "When I get older, I want to do just what you're doing." He said, "I want to do just what you're doing, and I want to be just what you are." And he said, "Well, do you want to do what I've done to be what I am?" It's the real question. Do you want to do what I've done to be what I am? And this is the real question that God asks of you. Do you want to do something great for God? If you do, expect the night. And the night is never pleasant, but that is when you know the devil cannot see the outcome, but God can. And he's in the midst of the storm. And I'm so grateful for that. Thank you for your kind attention. If you would please stand.